Today's guest has been called the mortgage magician, not just because of his ability to find creative lending solutions, but because of the way he rebuilt his thriving life through resilience, relationships, and positivity. Kevin Mace has been in the mortgage industry for over 21 years, surviving the subprime meltdown, career pivots, health challenges, and major life losses. Today we go beyond mortgage talk, and we'll dive into a real conversation about reinvention, community, and living life with purpose. So you're 21 years into the mortgages. Talk to me about, what's going on in your mind in 2000 during that 2008 during that crash. I know we kind of talked a little bit about it. I'm probably about 10 years younger than you, so the impact for me as a 17, 18-year-old at that time is nothing. I'm in college playing baseball, things like that. For you, what's kind of going through your mind emotionally, getting into the industry?
So I guess it probably starts a little bit earlier than that. I had got into the printing industry for about 5 years before getting into mortgages, and kind of dealt with a lot of the bigger corporations. We did labels, and I dealt with a lot of the bigger corporate entities in personal care and beverage industry, Pepsi, Sobe, Carteret, a lot of the Hiram Walker, Diageo, a lot of the big beverage companies. So I got a big introduction to kind of the corporate business world. And then when I was laid off, I jumped into mortgages. It was kind of funny for me because I remember my interview getting into mortgages and kind of asking them, what's involved with getting into mortgages. What do I need to do? What do I need for licensing? And they basically said, it was a Friday, and he said, come in Monday, we'll do 4 hours of training. You watch a couple of videos, I'll talk to you for 2 hours, and then you'll just cold call for 4 hours. I'm like, there's no licensing, there's nothing needed. And he was like, no, there's nothing needed. You just work under our license. And obviously that's evolved after the subprime meltdown, but basically just jumped in and started making cold calls and kind of tried to find my niche in the mortgage industry. And back then, subprime mortgages were really prevalent. I mean, that was the major form of lending where loans were falling off trees. We were giving people with a 580 credit score, stating their income at $150,000 and putting them into houses with 0% down when they really couldn't even show that they'd had the ability to pay their mortgages. It was crazy times. I mean, if you watch the movie The Big Short, it's a pretty good depiction of kind of how things went and how things were in the industry. So I wasn't much of a salesman, but what I learned was that a niche for me was really kind of learning people and kind of learning the psychology of people and working on their credit. And there were so many mortgages around then, so many people would just pick up a client. If they weren't approved, they just drop them. So instead of me doing that, I would kind of show them what they needed to do to get approved, put them in a plan to get there. The first loan I ever did was a foreclosure bailout, which meant the client was over 120 days late on their mortgage. The bank had called it due and was foreclosing on them. Back then, we had certain avenues if they had 30 to 35% equity to get them out of that loan into obviously a higher interest loan, but it was an option for them to save their house. And that was the first loan I did. I worked on it for about 90 to 100 days over 3 months and finally closed it. I was lucky I had a decent severance package of about 6 months worth of pay through the printing industry, so I could kind of get into the mortgage industry without without having to build up my business, because I still had that income. At the time, I had purchased a condo 3 or 4 years before, and basically my 2 roommates paid my mortgage. So it made it kind of easy for me. And I just did subprime mortgages for, that was 2000, 2003, 2004. I did subprime mortgages for the first 3-4 years of my career. And
What's the definition of subprime exactly?
so that was basically any of the mortgages that weren't insured by the major company, the major institutions you see insuring them now. Not an FHA mortgage, not a Fannie or Freddie mortgage, not a USDA mortgage, not a VA mortgage. I was never even taught to do those mortgages. Yeah. So when the subprime crash happened, I didn't really even know how to do the mortgages that were left out there. Yeah, so not only did I not have a client base, but I needed to kind of relearn the industry that was left out there.
So up until that point, things were running like that forever, I'm assuming, right?
As long as I had been in it. I don't know how long it had been going on prior to that. Like I said, I got in 2004. Yeah. So that's all I knew. That was pretty much all of what most of my office did.
Is that oversight by institution, government, or is that just kind of lack of competency in being able to give people all of this money? Because at the end of the day, right, your job is to do your job, right? So there's a saying called follow the money, right? That sounds like what you guys were doing. But at the end of the day, with not having regulation, things like that, I'm curious on opinion on why would something like that not just be in place?
Yeah, and it really was a lot because there was no regulation. And like I said, if you watch the movie The Big Short, it was a lot about greed and just money that was out there and people who were willing to lend it. And them just kind of bundling the mortgages in a certain way that it looked like they weren't as risky as they really were.
That's so interesting.
It is. It's funny that you say that because it was like 2 or 3 weeks into me doing, probably was more like 5 or 6 weeks into me doing mortgages. I walked into one of the owners of the company's office and I said, listen, I just pre-approved this guy for a $2,600 mortgage. He's been paying $1,200 a month in rent. He has a 580 credit score. He literally hasn't paid any of his credit cards in a month because he can't even afford his rent payment and what he's doing. I said, I just qualified him for 100% financing with 0% down. This model that we're just going to refinance them into a more affordable home in 2 years can't just continue. Houses can't just, math and common sense doesn't dictate that houses are just going to continue to appreciate 15 to 20% a year and we're going to be able to continue this model. I said to him, I'm going to tell this guy I can't qualify him even though I can because I know realistically he's not going to be able to afford this mortgage and something is going to come and he's going to get foreclosed on. And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, Kevin, I've been telling you for weeks that you're not charging people enough, right? And I said, yeah, I'm just making kind of what I'm comfortable with so I can get deals and so I can learn the business through doing it because I'm better hands-on than reading or watching videos. Sure. And he looked at me and he said, what do you think is going to happen when you tell him you can't get him a mortgage? I'm like, well, he's probably going to continue renting at half as much as he's renting and just continue on his way and be in a better position. He said, so you don't think he's going to stop at at this point, my office was on Boston Post Road in Orange. He said, you don't think he's going to stop at one of the other 4 mortgage companies that are on the same road we're on within a mile of us and someone else is going to approve him and probably charge him twice as much as you did and put him in a worse position? And I sat there and thought about it, and that's kind of how I personally made peace with it. I tried to show people, not only here's where you are, here's what you're approved for, here's what we can do, get in your house and go about your way. I put people into a CRM, so I was always in contact with them and said, here's the plan for 2 years, here's the plan for 4 years, here's the plan moving forward. And that's kind of how I made peace for it. But me not really having much of an education in finance or really even a background in finance other than the printing industry and being around the corporate people that I was, common sense just told me that this isn't going to work forever. This is going to crash. This isn't You know, these people aren't going to continue to be able to afford these houses like they have the last 2, 3, 5, however many years it had been.
That says a lot about you, man. For just to be able to see that, I had this conversation with Rob Wallace, whose episode dropped today, and this idea where regardless to how much you're approved for, realtors, and we made it very clear that there's not a realtor that I know, at least I don't know realtors personally that will do this, but say, hey, you got $600,000 approved for, here's your $600,000 house, or, you know, buy a $500,000 townhouse, 900 square feet, 3 bedrooms. That doesn't make any sense. You know, when your mortgage payment's going to be $4,000, like there's just no real value to that. It sounds like for you during that time, you caught on to that quick, and I'm interested in knowing, because you said, you know, you weren't the sales person you mentioned before, you know, your testing scores in high school and whatnot, but it sounds like you're a people person, very quick in your profession. I think 90% of what we do in business and what I've learned in the last decade is how you treat people. People don't care about what you did for them. They care about how you made them feel.
Right.
And that goes a long way. And it sounds like for you during that time, that was like your kind of the way you operated, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah. And kind of what I've learned about myself over the last, 2 to 5 years is that I'm an extreme empath, maybe even to a fault. My mother always tells me, you give people too much information. Sometimes you can tell a white lie or, you know, hold back the whole truth, but you are too much like your father and will tell people everything. Yeah. So, yeah, and it's kind of funny you mentioned the pre-approval amount, because I'll never, ever pre-approve somebody for a dollar figure. And I just had this conversation with a client, redid it this morning, but on Friday they were telling me what's the maximum amount I'm approved for. And I basically will tell a client, if you want to know the maximum amount you're approved for, you probably have to ask me 5 times, because I'm going to tell you to give me a property you're interested in. I'll show you the payments, or tell me a payment amount you're comfortable with. Yeah. 95 to 100% of people shop based on the payment. I mean, that's just math. You're shopping based on what you can afford monthly. So to tell people the maximum amount they're approved for sets up unrealistic expectations. Right. It gets them looking at houses that they can't realistically afford. And this is the analogy I always use. I said the house of your dreams is great, but it's worth nothing if you have to sit in the dark and play cards. You're going to end up hating your spouse. You're going to end up hating the house more than you had hated one that you can actually live your lifestyle for. So that'll literally take clients 3 or 4 times of them asking me what's the maximum amount I'm pre-approved for before I'll actually tell them, because I like to work off the payment they're comfortable with, or a property they've seen that they have interest in. Then I can show them the payments and we can work off that. Yeah. When you show them the maximum amount, they look at that house, and then that's their mindset, is that $500,000 house. Everything else is not going to meet their expectations, and they're going to have unrealistic expectations.
I was talking to somebody about this the other day, that we quite don't understand how, and again, I'm not ever in a place to spend somebody's money. What everybody does for a living, what they earn, that's awesome. But it is sometimes inconceivable when we're looking at this kind of rundown home and, you know, in the middle of, you know, somewhere here in Southeast Connecticut, and they're paying, you know, $3,500 for this mortgage payment. It's 1,200 square feet or 1,500 square feet. And it just doesn't make sense. And I'm thinking, like, you know, we were talking, our dialogue back and forth was, are people financially illiterate when it comes to this kind of stuff? Like, or are they making this decision based off of emotion? You know, you just said, hey, this is your maximum approval. Like, they see that number and then they get stuck on that. The logic is completely gone. It's the serotonin, the dopamine that comes with moving in, and
here's the keys to your car.
Take
it for the night.
It's like opening up a gift. You know, it feels fun and exciting, but the second, you know, give it a week, it's gone. That emotion is gone. Why? That's the question I have. Like, you know, in your experience with dealing with the amount of people that you have in your career, you know, it's a little different on the insurance side, because people need insurance. They don't choose to do this. They choose to come to me because of a referral from you or a referral from the realtor. However, they don't have to come to me. They could go somewhere else. But when it comes to purchasing something that's material, there is that emotion of wanting more than they should. What do you think that the driver for that is?
I don't know. It's become, like I said, I've been in this 21 years. I think it's become more and more prevalent as I get older with a younger group of borrowers. And I think it's really just that stuff isn't taught. There's not classes for that in high school, which I've never really understand. You don't have like some of these kids get out of high school and don't know how to do their taxes, don't understand it, don't know how to even do a budget for themselves. And I think it just comes down to education, which is why kind of my career started with educating people more about credit. And then as it's kind of evolved, more about payments and what you can afford. And I was telling a client maybe 5 weeks ago, I said, last time I was pre-approved myself for a mortgage, I literally was pre-approved for twice as much as I could afford without even using my fiance's income.
Yeah.
But it wasn't realistic for me.
Right.
I like to go out to eat. I like to go fishing. I like to do things. Other people might spend the majority of their time at home and they might make half as much as me and might be comfortable with the same mortgage payment that I am.
Yeah. So
it's not really for me to decide what you're comfortable with for a mortgage payment, because sure, I can look through your bank statements, your credit card statements, but I'm really not qualified to determine your lifestyle.
Right.
Right.
And you cannot answer this if you don't want, but isn't that kind of the same basis of the subprime lending kind of? Because it's like people were getting approved, making up figures, blah, blah, blah. And here we are. It's like you earn, let's just call $150,000. Congratulations, you're qualified for $1 million home.
Yeah.
Isn't that same kind of like layer?
It is. And that maybe that's kind of where that mentality started and where things changed, because, you talk about, at least my parents, the way I grew up, they were strong on budgets, were very frugal with their money, always saved money, never really lived above their means, never really went out to eat a lot. And I feel like people's wants are more these days, or needs to do the things that aren't really necessary.
Yeah.
But like you said, but it stokes that serotonin.
Yeah. Your first you said your first deal was a foreclosure bailout.
Yep.
Walk me through that. Like and this was in the industry, right? Your first deal in the industry.
Yep.
When I think about my first insurance deal, it was I was doing eyes on the road driving school in East Lyme, and my boss sent me there to do this weekly thing on a Sunday night. In the beginning of my career, I'm going there driving for 10, 20 minutes, get there, present for 5-10 minutes, try to collect forms, and then it was pretty good. But my first deal was with a gentleman who, basically, when I wrote his policy, he gave me his routing and account, his social security number, every possible thing needed for this person's life. And I'm thinking like, whoa. I look over to my wife. I'm like, he just gave me a social and routing account. And that emotion of anxiety stuck with me for a little while. Obviously, I eventually got over it and that's how we do business.
Yeah.
But that's my most vivid memory of when I joined the insurance industry. With that foreclosure bailout, what emotions you were carrying, and like, what do you remember about that one deal, and how does it kind of carry you through the rest of your career?
So the bank that did it, always remember, was IndyMac Bank. They're one of the ones that died and were part of the implodometer and blew up in the subprime meltdown. But the client was, like I said, in foreclosure. They were 120 days late. They had gotten into one of the mortgages that they really couldn't realistically afford. And similar to you, back then in the industry, when I was first in the industry, I remember it was like this moment of anxiety asking people for their social security number, because that was like the thing that dictated everything. It's a little easier now with online applications and it being on documents, but we were taking more handwritten mortgage applications then. And just that that moment when people gave you their social, it was like you triumphed. It was like victory. But yeah, that was an interesting mortgage because it took a long time to process. The bank was difficult to deal with. They asked for everything under the sun, and the borrower was a paralegal at a real estate law firm. So someone in my office had basically thrown the loan out, said, I can't do this. It's too much work. I'm not going to do it. Like a lot of the first loans I grabbed, and I picked it up and said, well, let me see if I can get it done. And that kind of leads back to the whole mortgage magician thing. And,
I see.
you know, I got that nickname from a couple of attorneys and realtors over the last 15 years, just because that's kind of my style. I always tell realtors, listen, if you have a deal that died or a client that was just rejected, start there with me, and I'll earn your trust that way.
That's
because, you know, if, like I said, if I can't get them approved, I'll put them in a situation where they can. But yeah, we ended up saving their house they had been in for a very long time, wanted to stay in, and she really had no other options. But I remember it was probably one of my proudest moments because it was not only my first loan, not only that I saved their house, but she was a paralegal at the law office. So she's in probably one of the best positions to refer me clients. Right. And I didn't really understand what a referral business was back then. We were basically just calling, and because mortgages were falling off trees. But I remember she sent me loans for about 15 years until she got out of the business.
What a great story. That's awesome, man. And
we've gone to NASCAR races with them, been at parties at their house. You know, I've just developed a friendship with them over the 21 years now. Yeah. So
I want to pivot to the relationship piece a little bit, but before we do that, I want to talk about your undiagnosed gluten allergy that you had mentioned. I thought that was interesting because, you know, we live through life. I say this all the time. I still feel like I'm 18 years old. And when you're 18, you feel untouchable. You're invincible. You know, I can drink as much. I can eat as much. I don't have to work out. I stay slim. But you get older and things start aching and then you ignore it.
Yeah, I'm pushing 50. So,
so you know, you look great, by the way.
Thank you.
You know, you know, even just recently, like having had the baby, and you know, my son gets up early. I fell asleep on the couch. You know, my back is really hurting. It's been hurting for like 5 days. I have never had that experience. And then you start thinking about other things like this ache, that ache. Walk me through the emotions of finding out about the gluten allergy. Is that something that like kind of derailed you?
Yeah, that's definitely something that's been quite a challenge and led to some other health issues the last 5 years, really specifically. But my whole life I had stomach issues. Things would upset my stomach, no idea what it was. When I was 2-year-old, went through every test. They prick you, you know, make you drink this, make you do that, dairy, this, that, and I came up with nothing. Fast forward to mortgage meltdown 2008, my stomach was in turmoil. I thought, all right, well, maybe this is stress related, maybe I've got ulcers. So I went to Yale and did a couple mornings worth of tests, all kinds of tests, these barium tests. You drink these solutions, you walk around, they follow it through your system. And at the end of the day, they basically said, you know, this is just a bad case of acid reflux or IBS. That's just what we're going to diagnose you with because we can't find anything else. So I put me on all kinds of med, Prilosec, omeprazole, Pepto, Tums, probably 4 other medicines we tried, and none of them really worked. Yeah. So at the end of those trials, I went to the three doctors I had seen, and I said, listen, we've tried all these meds. Some of them seem to work for a little bit and then stop. Little did I know it was because gluten was in between, and I'd get in the gluten and then it wouldn't work. And I'm like, marijuana was really the only thing when I'm sick and when I'm not feeling well. It's the only thing where I feel like I can eat. Yeah. Like I'll literally take one toke and my stomach will growl before I even exhale and I'll be hungry where I haven't eaten for 24 to 48 hours because I'll be hungry, but I'll go to eat and I'll feel lethargic and I'll take like 2 bites and it just won't feel good. So 2 of the 3 doctors were like, well, that's not legal right now. We can't tell you that that's your solution. But what we can say is you've tried every medicine we know. Do whatever works best for you. The third one said, I absolutely can't get behind that. Don't do that. Whatever. So I used marijuana whenever the gluten got to me, probably over the next 10 years.
Sure.
Fast forward to the day after Valentine's Day, 2020. I had gotten into an argument with my wife. Next morning, I was feeling shitty. I had dry heaved for probably every morning for like the last 5 weeks. But that morning, it was really bad. I dry heaved probably for like 45 minutes. It just felt like shit. She made me some chicken noodle soup. Came in, started talking to me. She said, did you get into the Sambuca when I went to bed? And I said, no. She said, well, what did you drink? I said, literally, I had 2 of those Thimble Island coffee stouts. She looks at me kind of funny, and she said, well, when did you feel this shitty last? And I said, probably about a month ago. What did we do that night? We went to the Little Pub. What did you eat? I think I had a burger. Oh, and I had 2 of those Thimble Island coffee stouts there at the Little Pub. She's like, well, those things are like 2 loaves of bread each.
Right.
She looks at me and she says, well, when do you not feel shitty? I'm like, well, when we eat here, I don't typically feel shitty. When we eat at my mother's, I don't really feel shitty. But when we eat at your mother's house, I feel pretty crappy. Her mother's Korean, cooks a lot of soy, a lot of fried food. And she had made me a bowl of chicken noodle soup. She almost smacked it out of my hand and was like, stop eating that. And we started looking up like what I ate at my mother's, what I drank. Rum and Coke was usually a drink at my mother's.
Yeah.
Look that up. It's gluten-free. Coke and rum and Captain is gluten-free. So we figured out must be gluten.
Yeah.
So that was February 2020. Set up an appointment to go get tested for, I knew celiac had run in my family. Get tested for celiac. Well, that was middle of COVID, was just starting. They shut down all doctor's appointments that weren't necessary. I had cut out gluten, but I didn't get a chance to go to the doctors. I think it was, 3-4 months, however many months it was before they opened up doctor's appointments again. I had completely cut gluten out of my system. So I felt great, like I'd never felt before. I didn't dry heave after that morning ever again. I haven't dry heaved in the morning, haven't felt like I can't eat unless I get into the gluten here or there. So, that was my, I never really got tested because in order to get tested for celiac and everything, you've got to have the gluten in your system. The treatment's the same, whether it's an allergy, intolerance, or celiac, you cut out gluten.
Yeah.
So I basically just completely cut out gluten, felt great, and knew that it didn't matter what my diagnosis is.
Right.
It's all the
That's,
same
you're gonna have to
treatment.
trade
I
the
just
same
gotta
thing.
not do gluten.
That's crazy. So you just kind of connected the dots throughout this process. Insane.
Yeah.
Oh man. I mean, I would have ignored it. I think that's what I just kind of was saying. Like, so many different things that I feel and think I probably shouldn't ignore, but I do. And this is only 5 years ago. So for you, my first thought when you're like, oh, I'm starting to throw up or, dry heave, was like, you probably had COVID.
Feeling bloated. Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking COVID, obviously, because that's when he had it. He probably had, early COVID, but that's insane to hear, man. And this, when you're going through all this, is there a emotional piece that you feel that impacts your work at the same time, or are you able to kind of go through it?
So it was kind of interesting because at that point I didn't need the marijuana anymore. Completely cut that out for maybe 6 months. And I started noticing I was losing concentration. I was having a hard time focusing. It got to the and this is kind of funny, it will lead to your I was listening to one of your other podcasts and you talked about a dry January. And I used to, every year I would take a month off and do sober whatever month it was, usually February or October, because I had the least amount of
activities,
of drinking.
And 28 days in February.
In February. Yes. And
February,
October really only has Halloween, and I would always say, well, I can have a couple drinks on Halloween because it's my wife's Korean and it's already November in Korea.
Yeah.
So it was kind of ironic, led to me really being diagnosed with ADHD, because it got to like 5-6 months after I had completely stopped smoking weed.
Yeah.
Like even, a hit or two a day, nothing.
Yeah.
And my mind wasn't functioning. There was a week where it was really detrimental to my business. I lost probably 2 or 3 clients because it took me, I couldn't even form a complete sentence without getting to the end of it and losing concentration. I know you've recently kind of been through the ADHD thing too. And I couldn't figure it out. Went to the doctor. They diagnosed me, and it's funny because when I would do those sober months, I would get like 2 weeks in, and my wife would say to me, can you just smoke some weed? You're like, you act like you're stoned when you're not. You can't like think straight. You forget things. You're not focusing. Well, that was... Come to find out, after meeting with the pharmacist, meeting with the doctor, that was me basically treating my ADHD with the marijuana and never really even knowing I had it, which led me to think about, we talked about my testing scores in school and how I was really good with the math end, but the English end and that stuff that didn't interest me, no good. Well, it wasn't because I wasn't trying. It was just because my mind doesn't allow me to focus on the stuff that doesn't interest me.
It's crazy, right? Isn't it? It's insane. I mean, it was October of last year that I was diagnosed with ADHD, and a lot of it came from my inability to just kind of stay focused, like you said, on the things that don't interest me. Not that my work doesn't interest me, but the mundane tasks of sitting behind the desk and just data input, that thing just gets boring. Yeah. So I'd find myself like squirreling and doing this and doing that. But
doing something you enjoy, sports.
Yes, golf. Yeah. There was a 2-year window of me stepping away from the desk to play golf probably 3 days a week. Had a lot of fun doing it, but I just got to a point where I'm just like, man, like I'm getting frustrated with my inability to stay locked in, if that makes sense. So I told my doctor, I said, hey, what's going on? So they did this I did like a 3.5 hour evaluation. I don't know what it was like for you, but for me, I was like, man, they're asking me so many different questions, and come to find out, I got the diagnosis. But now I know, like now it's like
life makes so much more sense.
So much more sense.
Isn't it crazy?
It's so wild because I'll sit down and I'm like, I know why I can't find my keys. I know why I can't find my wallet.
Why you have to come back in the house 3 times because you don't have your wallet, your keys, your money.
And I'm less frustrated
why
about it.
I put my keys always in the same pocket, my money always in my wallet because I do my check. And I've always done that because I've conditioned myself, not even knowing I had the condition.
And even just things like right now, I'm heavily into the podcast. This is my thing, but now I've been able to channel the ADHD. I've been able to channel the things that I'm actually passionate about and leverage the ADHD to focus on that piece, which is, I think it's almost a blessing to be identified as or diagnosed with it, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I definitely was for me. And somebody recently mentioned to me that he now calls it ADHA because it's attention deficit hyperability, because he's able to channel it and focus it, and it kind of makes you, when you can do that, it kind of makes you feel like Superman.
It does, man. It really does. I'm very thankful.
So it's funny because I went to one of the pharmacists at the marijuana shop, and she explained to me that her ADHD meds had gone MIA during COVID, like a lot of meds and a lot of things, and she couldn't get them. So she looked up marijuana, and she had never used marijuana before. She was a pharmacist at the marijuana store, but she had never used it. And she said she found some strains and the ways to be able to actually use it to focus herself. So she gave me some particular strains and more CBD than THC, but ways that I could use it to focus it. I tried that for about a year and a half, and that really didn't work for me. But it was kind of funny because she said, yeah, it was the first time I tried it. I went to church, and it really had me focused, but it just felt like church was going on for like 6 hours.
That's hilarious.
It was kind of funny. But yeah, now I realize that I haven't smoked any weed in 6-8 months.
Yeah.
I barely drink anymore because I noticed that the drinking revs up my ADHD, and not necessarily like even having like 2 or 3 glasses of wine. It's the next morning that I feel that I'm not focused and I can't concentrate. I've just found ways like you, if we're sitting there working for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours straight, I'll definitely start not having to focus, and I'll have to get up and do the dishes, do the laundry, do something like pretty much every morning now that there's no substance in my life. Really, I wake up every morning 4, 5, 6 in the morning, amped up, ready to go. So I've been going to the gym pretty much every morning, and that burns off my ADHD and allows me to focus the rest of the day.
That's crazy.
So it's kind of just been watching what I eat. I've never done caffeine because it's, and now I know why, because it always screwed with my ADHD so bad that I would get wired, hyper focused, and then I would just crash, or I needed to keep going with it, and then I was just a jittery mess.
No, and
I don't do any soda, any caffeine, any coffee, none of that.
You don't do coffee either? No. Wow.
Nope.
See, I actually, it helps, right? When
that's what a lot of people say. Yeah.
And for the longest time, I drank coffee because I just genuinely liked the taste. And
I love the taste, and I love the smell too.
And the longer I've gone, and now that I know I have this, I have a cup or 2 throughout the day, and it just kind of gets me even more locked in the zone and what I have to do.
But probably if you don't have it, it sends you off
a little bit.
Do too much.
Too much. It's anxiety. I'm thinking of
17 things,
Kevin send me this person, that person. I'm all over the place, and then I get really anxious and kind of got to step away from pretty much the entire day, which is not productive.
That's what I've noticed is my anxiety level the last 2 years, it's slowly gone down, but the last 6 months since I've kind of cut out everything and just concentrated on those sugars. To me, if I have too much sugar, it'll amp me up and go from there.
That's such an amazing thing that like anything that we go through or feel is a reaction to something that we're putting in our body, and we ignore that.
Wild to think
we
about,
ignore it.
Society has a strain to it.
Even simple, like just saying like, oh, my back was hurting for 5 days. Like, I drink beer. I love beer. You've probably heard it a million times on my show. What if maybe I stopped drinking beer as often as I did and take a little bit more water, reduce the inflammation in my body, things like that. So,
or we're masking the pain with the beer.
Correct. Correct. Was there a low moment in your life, personally, financially, that you were about to just step away from mortgages completely and say, you know what, to hell with this?
Yeah, 100%. After the subprime crisis and everything, it kind of hit me 12-fold. My business partner was living in my investment property. So not only did my income get about, I don't know, more like a third of what it was just for me personally. I wasn't collecting any rent from him because we weren't doing much for mortgages. It was my soon to be, my fiance at the time, was pregnant with our first and only child. So she had a 12-year career at the casino. I was living in New Haven and Brantford. Well, I was living in New Haven. My other property was in Brantford, and took her out of her $60,000-$70,000 a year job. So my income was almost, not overnight, but within 3 to 6 months, 20% of what it was before. Around that same time, actually, I remember the moment distinctly. My father was up helping me. I had 2 mortgages on each property, had leveraged them just like everyone else did back then. And the subprime crisis was looking to build a more real estate portfolio.
Rich dad, poor dad mentality.
Yep. And that crashed and burned. All my equity I spent, and all the money I had saved, I spent trying to save both those houses until I got to the point where I couldn't afford or pay for any of those mortgages. And I remember my father coming up to help me do some work on the condo so I could sell it. And then I was doing work on my house so I could sell it. And he got into a coughing fit, which is when I knew that he was sick. So along that same time, that was June 2009, we lost my father. So we had planned to move back up to East Lyme area because their son was being born. Wife's family's from Montville. My family's from East Lyme, closer to family, and wanted to be in the East Lyme school system. But that whole process kind of got sped up with my father passing, which was kind of... never say your father passing is good timing, but it was good timing because we were able to move in with my mother and kind of help her out through all her emotional issues, which helped us financially because we were basically bankrupt at that point.
Right. Wow. It sounds like for you though, and maybe I'm wrong. Like you're kind of like a think forward kind of guy, right? Yeah. Like while I'm listening to you say all of this, like. I've had several conversations with people on the show where, and not saying that that's not an emotional aspect, but you're able to kind of disconnect from what's happening now to, all right, what's the next move? Yeah. And I think that's what makes people successful. Like being able to detach from this idea of what's happening to me now, I was a victim of it. You become a victim of your mentality. Yeah. I've suffered with, election, recession, economy, and then you start just wallowing in those ideas and you're not worried about the next move. Yeah. And you basically, shoot yourself in the foot. So while it sounds like a low moment, it kind of seems like it was just a steady kind of trajectory forward.
Yeah, it was funny because learning the regular mortgages that were out there, my wife got her fiance then got her real estate license, and I kind of saw an opportunity to do short sales. So I actually negotiated short sales while learning mortgages. Cool. She listed the house for sale. Yes. I got paid for negotiating the short sale. Yep. She got paid for selling the house. And that's kind of how we stayed afloat through that. At the same time, I was introduced to business networking through what was BNI then. And that's really what resurrected my career because just going to that group, I didn't end up getting accepted to the group that I was in, but it gave me the opportunity to get 3 pieces of business and understand what referral business was, what marketing was. I ended up starting my own, which was a BNI group. Now is Shoreline United Networking, but I started my own business group because 7 mortgage people applied to the group that I visited, got whittled down to me in another. I wasn't accepted, but like I said, I got 3 pieces of business and said, I've got to do this. Sure. I mean, this is gold. This is gold for my business. And it was kind of a fight with BNI for them to allow me to open up a group in the same town where there already was one. And they kept telling me I was going to fail. And I said, well, if I fail, then I got to look for a new career. And I don't know what the hell I'm going to do after mortgages. So.
What surprises you most about your career trajectory?
I think all of the friends that I've made, all the personal connections that I've made through business and all the connections that have come into my business from a personal aspect. Probably if you ever asked me when I was in the printing industry or even the first 5 years of my mortgage career before I moved up back to East Lyme, my hometown, I never would have said there's such a connection between the business and the personal end. But I guess at the end of the day, learning that people do business with people they know, like, and trust really only makes sense that you're going to gain so many friendships and just unique relationships.
I feel like going just even back to earlier when you were like, they don't teach the financial aspect in schools, the literacy. I feel like in I might get some backlash for this, but, from my education, going through high school, college, everything was taught on a transactional basis, not in a relationship basis, and you operate as someone who is going to go into this world and you're going to make a lot of money, but there's no real emphasis on developing relationships with people, maybe treat people how you want to be treated, but really focusing on those bonds and whatnot. I don't know what the solution is to that, but I feel like having looked back even 10 years, even now, you know, my last 2 years of my life in the business has been strictly relationships. Like I want to build relationships. And since I've taken that approach, for me, I feel like that's where things are just kind of coming together. I'm receiving more referrals from all over the place than I had ever before, strictly with that mindset. So it's just an interesting note. Couple minutes left.
At the same time, have you noticed yourself get rid of maybe toxic, even business relationships or businesses that you didn't align with?
Yeah, I have seen myself be more direct with people in different businesses, and I have been able to say no respectfully to people. I've been able to say no to clients respectfully. I'm not going to just put something on the books to put it on the books, especially if your roof is 30 years old. You know what I mean? Yeah. You know, I try to avoid that. If you asked me 8 years ago, ignorance was bliss. I was doing things for
anything you could get.
I was a yes man, you know, dropping at the, you know, just how I was. But I haven't really cut anyone out because I haven't really had to do that in the last couple of years because I had to reinvent myself. And reinventing myself through this podcast and through the network, meeting you, having people on, the connections that you guys are bringing me. Now when I get the new connection like the gentleman you just sent over last week, it's how do I make his life better? How do I help him? Very much like what Brandon did for me to introduce me to you. And it just, it kind of just makes sense now.
Yeah.
You know, if your life was a movie, what movie would it be?
Oh boy. That's one I wasn't prepared for. I don't know. It'd have to be some Adam Sandler movie, but I don't know which one just because he always resonates with me. I'm not sure I could really pick a movie. I mean, you talk about the Subprime Meltdown. I talked about The Big Short before. That's a really good depiction of what we went through. But I don't know that my story's told enough to know what movie I would really be dictated by yet.
All right, well, sit on that one. We got to let me know next time we get together. Kevin, where can people find you?
I mean, you can find me. Do you want my email address or
however people could get a hold of you?
Yeah. I mean, the best way to get a hold of me, I'm like I said, I'm self-employed, so I'm not just working 9 to 5. If you need to get a hold of me nights, weekends, that's fine. Text seems to be a good form of communication for people these days. 860-460-6499's been my cell phone number since it was Bell Atlantic Mobile, and they were bought out by Verizon. God, probably closing in on 30 years ago. So I remember having my first cell phone. Email Kevin L. Mace, Mace @gmail.com. You can look me up on Facebook or Instagram, Kevin Mace, Mace Mortgage on Instagram, I believe. Really any means of contacting me that clients are comfortable with. It seems like a lot of it is less so person to person like we're doing now, which I've always loved and I wish there was more of, but
which is why I started this show.
Yeah. But everything's a kind of a digital world now. I mean, I've had clients who, one thing I like to do is I like to go to the closing table. I like to sit at my closings and look at my client and see the joy in their face. And it's a great opportunity to ask everyone in the room for referrals. I never really understand why more mortgage people don't take the time to do it, because for me, it's one of the most profitable 2-3 hours of my month.
Love that.
But yeah, I really wish there was more of that personable face-to-face. Everything is kind of done online. I've had a lot of clients that I literally have never even had a phone conversation with. Wow. Which is just odd.
Wow. Well, listen, Kevin Mace, this was great. Appreciate it. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, having you on my show. Looking forward to working together. You know, I think that that's happening now. So we'll maybe have you back on for part 2 sometime down the road.
Definitely.
All right,
definitely.
Thanks.
Thank